When my mother, a lifelong Baptist from North Georgia, wanted to marry my father, a Roman Catholic Cajun from South Texas, they had a problem. No one would perform the ceremony in Georgia in January 1947. They had met on St. Simon's Island, my mother, a school teacher, my dad, a Navy aviator. Both sets of ministers declined to participate, and while a justice of the peace would have married them, neither wanted that option. Finally, after much searching and meeting with priests and pastors, they found one priest who would marry them. Moments before the Mass was to begin, the priest gave my mother a piece of paper for her to sign, promising to raise her children as Catholics. This was not a promise that she kept, nor did she feel guilty about it, since she felt bushwhacked by that sneaky priest. As a Baptist, she felt she had the right to decide where she would raise her kids. Since this difficulty in finding someone to marry my parents was a part of the meta-narrative of my family, I developed a soft heart towards couples who had no one to marry them. This in no way should be taken to mean that I'll marry anyone who comes to me requesting it. Quite the contrary, I decline more weddings than I accept, and so do my colleagues. I want to talk to you this morning about Christian same-sex marriage and our church's role with it. This is not a sermon about homosexuality, the Bible, and Christian ethics. I've covered that with you before, and it's available on our website. I've provided you written copies of the sermon, as I try to do when the subject is controversial. I do that so that if you take issue over lunch with a point that I made, let it be with something that I actually said rather than something misremembered. Additionally, I'll be in the back, and my email is on the sermon text for those who prefer that avenue. Let me be clear. This is a Christian church in the Baptist tradition. So you're free to believe what you wish about this crucial issue, whether you agree with me or not. You are welcome here. I was cruising on the Bosphorus, the Istanbul Strait, on a Turkish ferry. That doesn't really sound that right. But I was on a Turkish ferry in November with a good friend who's a leader in European Baptist life. The day was amazing. The water was a deep teal, and we were stuffed from a lunch of fresh fish sandwiches when he asked me, why do progressive American Baptists care about same-sex marriage? Since we've known each other for a while, we talk in shorthand that good friends often do. Well, I said, once I was convinced that homosexuality was not a sin, and that you could be actively gay and be a faithful follower of Jesus, then marriage was the logical outcome. So it became a justice issue for all of us that all God's people are able to be pair bonded with the one that they love before God. Besides, we're convinced that this is exactly where God's wild spirit has led us. So we spent the afternoon talking about that issue while we watched the jellyfish float by and the mosques slip through. Neither he nor I believe that homosexuality to be inherently sinful, but I told him that for me it went further than that. That I had come to understand that it wasn't just that one sexual orientation wasn't sinful, but that the variety of non-exploitive sexual orientation and relationships and their sexual expression, those were divine blessings too, and diverse and deserving of the church's blessing. It was a fine afternoon. In the call to worship, we read together the type of affirmation of marriage that we use here to begin a Christian marriage ceremony at College Park. In our tradition, the service is built around three sets of promises: the declaration of intent, the marriage vows, and the ring vows. Of course, there's often special music and scripture reading and poetry, prayers and blessings, fancy clothes, candles, flowers, a cute flower girl, a ring bearer, sometimes even a dog. But the three promises are the crux of the service. The declaration of intent is understanding that God has created, ordered, and blessed the covenant of marriage. You affirm your desire and intention to enter into this covenant. To which the betrothed responds, I do. The families of these two also make promises to pray for them and support them. And then all those witnessing their vows are asked to make the same promise. In this way, the wedding becomes worship, and the audience becomes participants. I chose the Hebrews 13 passage because of the wonderful grouping of admonitions. Let mutual love continue, which, of course, is the essence of healthy Christian community and a good marriage. It's followed by commands for hospitality to strangers and visiting people in prison and helping those who are being tortured. This is so contemporary. Then this wonderful phrase, the marriage bed is undefiled and should remain so, which was interpreted to me growing up as meaning in marriage, everything between two married consenting adults is pure. It was an alluring thought that Christian marriage was the proper sexual playground for adults. This then is coupled with a warning against greed and an assurance of fearlessness due to God's continued presence with us. The short Song of Songs passage is one of my favorites for weddings. It's part of the holy, erotic love poem that is the Song of Songs. And I love saying that phrase at weddings in order to wake people up and to remind people that sex and holiness properly go arm in arm. If the speaker in Song of Songs is a young woman who has been conscripted into the king's harem, then maybe she is remembering the shepherd boy whom she truly loves. Love is a fierce, scorching blaze. Love is stronger than death and outlasts it. Love is a raging flood. Love is richer than wealth. Four seldom read biblical metaphors that are love's essence. Perfect for a wedding. In January 2012, over 2 years ago, I asked our personnel committee to clarify their position on the ministers of College Park performing same-sex marriages. I wasn't required to do this, you understand, but I wanted everything that we do here to be above board and above reproach. And I understand from experience that church leadership doesn't appreciate surprises. Personnel said that they'd be happy to study it and asked me for my thoughts, so I gave them these 6. First, I asked them to clarify, what services does College Park offer her members? Well, we offer funeral services, Bible study, counseling, child care, spiritual guidance, worship services, child dedication and presentation, adult choir, youth choir, children's choir, handbells and tone chimes, meals, just to name a few. And of course, we perform marriages. All of these services for all of our members. The second thing I wanted to know was, are any of our bylaws gender specific? Do any of our bylaws make any mention of these services being offered only to heterosexuals? No, none is specified. All members should be able to receive all services. And in a very real sense, this settles the issue. Thirdly, I reminded them that in our church, as in almost all churches, ministers have always had the right to decide whom we will and will not marry. Note that we do not decide who may and who may not get married, only whether or not he or she will perform the wedding. This is how several Baptist churches in the South resolved the same-sex marriage issue. The minister simply stated that he was the only one who would decide whom he would marry and went ahead with it. While this is one extreme that I really wanted to avoid, it is completely true that we ministers decide which weddings we will or we will not perform. The prerogative has always belonged in our wheelhouse. Fourthly, I pointed out that in almost every Baptist church, whether fundamentalist or liberal, Baptist ministers do not consider themselves functionaries of the state. Baptists are Christians with authority issues. And we hate with a passion being told what to do by anyone other than God. The wedding and unions that we perform are sacred religious covenants, not civil ceremonies. True, we may sign a North Carolina wedding certificate, but we are suspicious of any church-state entanglement, and the signing occurs after the religious service, which is the proper order in how we view it. Fifth, most weddings are private worship services. In only a few cases is everyone from an entire church invited. It's your choice whether or not to attend, so there's no exclusion of anyone from a regular worship service. Weddings are optional, usually private services. Lastly, and relatedly, since performing a wedding for same-sex couples is a controversial new practice, this matter should remain a matter of individual conscience. This goes for both our church ministers who might perform a same-sex wedding and for whomever might attend. As I said in the beginning, all of us here are free to believe whatever we believe that God has led us to on this issue. Armed with these 6 considerations, our personnel committee spent months discussing them. I did not attend these discussions. I could have, but I chose not to allow for their free discussion. During this time, for the entire fall of 2012, we had an in-depth Bible study with a talkback on marriage on Wednesday nights, to which everyone was invited. Each night we began by discussing in small groups a biblical passage, and then we featured numerous couples, both gay and straight, as they talked about their relationships, the good parts and the difficult times too. It was excellent, honest, funny, theological, real. Kudos to those who attended and studied, and especially to those who were interviewed. I asked for clarification on this policy by our personnel committee, and they brought one to our deacons. After more discussion there, this is what both groups passed in November 2012. Church ministers are empowered by the congregation to perform, as they deem appropriate, ceremonies that sanctify the commitment and love between couples, including but not exclusive to the people within the church membership. Part of the discussion with the deacons vis-a-vis personnel was both groups' concern that our church not become a wedding chapel. I shared with them 2 insights that I think allayed their fears. First, most ministers do not love officiating weddings. The ones we do love doing are the ones of people whom we are deeply involved with, like our church members. But a wedding takes up most of one's entire weekend. The prep beforehand, the Friday night rehearsal, and the dinner afterwards, the wedding itself and the reception eat up time that we could be spending with our families, which is deeply worth it for people that we know and love, not worth it at all for people we already know. And unlike funerals in which family members normally act out after the funeral, difficult family members likely act out before or during a wedding. You feel me on this, right? You've been there. Secondly, I let the deacons and personnel know that we turn down numerous wedding requests annually here at College Park. Our church plant is located directly across from UNCG. Students wander over here all the time wanting to get married. And to most of these, we say no. Incidentally, the main criterion is whether or not the couple can take my role as a minister seriously. We don't do secular services. So in sum, we're not in any danger of marrying just anyone who asks for it, unless we can put on staff a really excellent Elvis impersonator. Personnel reported this clarification to the church during a business meeting in March of 2013, almost a year ago. So, to recap, over 2 years ago, at my request, our personnel committee discussed our staff's role in same-sex marriages and came up with a policy clarification. This was presented to, discussed, and affirmed by our deacons, and then presented to the church. Then additionally, for 4 months in 2012, we held Bible studies, discussions, talkback, and testimony on our theology of marriage. Not only will we address directly some of the concerns that you might be having. First, some of you may be thinking, wait, you mean that College Park has never yet performed a same-sex wedding? We have not. Partly because we needed to have the very discussion we've been having for the last 2+ years. And partly because I wanted us to move slowly if we were going to do something that was relatively new in the history of Christianity. But this is where God's Spirit has led us now, and I believe that we've moved here largely as a congregation. Victor Hugo said, "There is nothing so powerful as an idea whose time has come." Others of you may be wondering, is it legal for us to do this since Amendment 1 is now North Carolina law? I'm not a lawyer, so I cannot give legal advice. But yes, it is legal for us to hold most any type of religious service that we think appropriate. Our sacred ceremony carries no force of law or legal standing. Some of you may be saying, look, I don't really care what our church or any other congregation does until marriage is legal for everyone. A religious service without legal acceptance lacks the force of law. A church service is a placebo at best. Even so, from my Baptist perspective, a Christian service in which Ann and I made solemn promises before friends, family, and God has more binding power than any court of law could provide. Because I believe that God is real and that God is love, I believe that a threefold cord, the two people and God, is not easily broken. Nevertheless, most here will not stop working and praying for the day in which every American adult has the right to wed whomever they love. And our fight against Amendment 1 2 years ago gives teeth to this statement. Some of you may wish that I would not call same-sex unions marriage or consider them weddings. Again, I think I understand this point, but let me gently remind us that one person doesn't get to decide for another what he or she will call or consider this. It's for each individual to decide. Theologically, what we're talking about is marriage, be it between gay or straight partners. And here at College Park, we're definitely not afraid of words. If it looks like a wedding, if it sounds like a marriage, if it seems like a worship service, there you have it. Perhaps there are a few of you that wish that we had all voted as an entire church on whether or not College Park ministers would perform same-sex weddings. There are several crucial reasons that I did lead us in that direction. First, we don't vote on matters of worship here, like communion or baptism or weddings. One of the central purposes of worship is to bring us together before God, and you absolutely cannot do that if you're bitter that your side lost the communion vote. A vote encourages divisiveness. Secondly, the point here was to treat all our members the same, and since here no one votes on any heterosexual couple's right to wed, the right to be married by clergy was already laid out in our bylaws. If you're married, no one voted on whether or not you would get married, although many of us wanted to vote on the Wayne and Susie. Equality before God is a distinctive Christian virtue, which we're not to violate. Thirdly, I wanted to avoid both extremes, which seems to be how several well-meaning sister churches went astray. The extremes being, on the one hand, where only the pastor made this decision, and on the other hand, the entire church voted on whether or not fellow members had the right to be wed. Both violated the consciences of all who were deeply committed to the right of the individual believer to make his or her decisions before God. Lastly, it would have been unjust for us to vote on something that God gave for all of us. As we affirmed at the beginning of the service, God gave us marriage for the joy of full sexual expression, for companionship, for emotional survival with another human with whom we might grow up and grow old, and in whom we might see the face of God. This cannot be withheld from another person by heterosexual fiat or a notion of privilege. It is all our right to be joined with one another before God. My wedding ceremony to Anne was a wonder. I mean by that most of my friends were really wondering why she was marrying me. It began, of course, long before the first day of summer 1986, at least as far back as when I asked her to marry me in front of Tidwell Hall at Baylor's campus, the exact spot that we first met. My groomsmen were many of my best minister friends, guys that are still in my life. Greg Mobley, Chuck Rush, Charles Massey, Mark Jaffe. My brother was my best man. We were married at First Baptist Church, Birmingham, Michigan, an American Baptist church, and my mentor, Sam Williams, presided. We were married at noon on a sunny Saturday, accompanied by a fantastic cellist. Sadly, she didn't know any AC/DC tunes. We did sing Beethoven's Joyful, Joyful, We Adore Thee, and heard the soloist give a soulful version of How Can I Keep From Singing. Both sets of parents stood with us. It was the last family wedding my father-in-law was alive for, and it was his best. The reception was a sit-down dinner at the Novi Hilton, which Anne's brother-in-law owned. We had a Christian R&B singer. I mean, of course, it was Detroit, right? Sing a Shake Russell tune, and a strolling band serenaded the guests. Afterwards, the party moved on to Anne's huge home, which sat on 12 acres. My brother said afterward it was the most spiritual and most fun wedding that he'd ever been to. The point being, I wish such a wedding for all who desire. Sure, there were difficult times ahead of us then, there is in every marriage, but we were well begun, surrounded by friends and family as we made promises before God. And there have been times that we would not have made it as a couple had we not stood in front of all those people and made those promises. We still may not. There are never any guarantees. But a good beginning is crucial. How can I not wish that for all who want to marry? Those of you who are LGBTQ and have stayed in the Christian church as straight Christians have fumbled and fumed and tried to figure out whether God messed up while creating you. I want you to know that I am personally humbled and inspired by you. In standing with Jesus and staying faithful to this flawed institution, even as the larger Christian church may have persecuted you, you have demonstrated a love and a perseverance that I can only call Christ-like. You, my friends, have modeled the sacrificial love of our Lord to me. We at College Park are a better church, a more beautiful church, a more gracious church because you are among us. Now that the day has come that College Park will allow its clergy to exercise pastoral discretion in marrying all who want to order their relationships according to Christ's love, be assured that I and the rest of the staff welcome you into my messy office for that conversation and into this sanctuary for that ceremony. For those of you who might struggle with that choice, don't worry. You're also welcome in my office too. Come by, we'll get a cup of Joe and I'll get a Pepsi Max and we'll talk. Maybe even we'll invite some of the same-sex couples in our congregation to join us. No one will bite each other, I promise. We'll share the gospel and ourselves as our good book instructs. And we'll trust that the love of Christ is big enough to hold on to us and eventually to welcome us all home.
As a choir, it is always our aim every Sunday to add on to the sermon, to preach from the choir, if you will. This morning, our message from the choir is that this love that is stronger than death is one that we wish for everyone to experience. This morning, as we're singing, we were reminding ourselves, as we were preparing this morning, that this love that God gives us to give to each other cannot be quenched by many waters, cannot be taken out by other people saying things against it, and that it can survive even through death. And so that's the gift that we share through song this morning, and we hope that it ministers to you the way that it ministers to us.